Hello. There we go. Why, hello. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. Really excited to get started and walking you guys through notebooks. This is our third webinar that we've had so far on notebooks specifically. So far, it's probably our most popular one. I think notebooks in general, whether or not you are used to Julius or you're new to Julius, or if this is your I don't know, you're a veteran pro at using Julius. I think everyone wants to learn a little bit more about our notebooks feature. A lot of different cool things that the team's built out over the past several months here for notebooks specifically, and a lot of things that folks don't either know what notebooks are capable of, or just the different use cases that you have for notebooks too. Audio is very low. All right, let me turn it up here. Audio low. Let's see here. Is this better? Is this better here? A little bit more? Testing. Thanks, Hari, for flagging, and Bronson. Is this better, or am I just quiet? Good? Good. That's the one thing I wish about this streaming software, is that there was some way for me to get some feedback in my ear before we get started. I tested it out before, but we'll see how it goes. But if there's anything that's going off on the stream, just feel free to let me know. I have the chat open here on the side as we go through this. But to talk over again what I said, this is our third iteration of the notebooks of webinar. A lot of cool learnings here. I think it's if you haven't seen our videos, we did some analysis on some of the webinar metrics, and it's our most popular webinar so far. A lot of different learnings and things that I think folks just don't know about notebooks, or how to unlock the potential of notebooks right here in Julius. So really excited to talk through those today. We'll talk through the basic, what is a notebook and why should you use it? What are the different cell types? How do you actually use a notebook? How do you run a notebook and have, reiterate on a notebook over time? And then finally, like some last questions, like why would you want to use a notebook, or how do you actually run different runs? What is a run? All of those will be different things that we'll cover today. If you haven't, we have these webinars every week, and we're actually going to start doing them twice a week now, just from some feedback we've gotten from folks. This is our 201 session. If you haven't watched it yet, or you haven't tuned into our onboarding session, those are every other Tuesday, and we'll go through really the basics of Julius. How do you actually prompt Julius? How do you upload files into Julius? We'll cover a little bit of that today, but if you haven't watched those, that's also visible in our YouTube down below, in our live section too. So you could always tune in for any upcoming webinars or see our previous webinars down below also. Also, subscribe to our Luma. That's another way for you to keep in touch with our latest and greatest, either things that we have going on here at Julius, but also for these webinar series that we've been doing. And then finally, I'll plug this at the end as well, but our community Slack. This is something that we recently spun up. You guys can sign up to our Slack. The link is down in julius.ai, or I'll share it after the chat too, or after the webinar. You could sign up directly there, direct line of communication with our team. We're really responsive over there. And then also you can get answers from folks in the community too. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Cool, let's go and get started. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. This is the Notebooks UI, right? What is a notebook to begin with? Well, a notebook is what we call A notebook is a collection of cells. Cells you could think of are like building blocks for how you want to analyze your data. Normally, when you're interacting in a thread, for example, and I'll pull up one of my old threads here. Normally, when you're interacting with a thread in Julius, you're talking in just a really basic chat UI. The results stream downwards, and you're working linearly, right? You can rerun a prompt that you do in Julius in a thread, but you can't really do that for prompts before the last one that you had sent, right? Imagine if I wanted to sort of pivot maybe 2 steps back or 3 steps back, or maybe I want to introduce a new file before I do more analysis. A little bit tricky to do that in a thread environment. So that's how I like to explain notebooks. Notebooks is more of a building block style analysis tool for you to use, right? You could compile multiple different types of cells. You could put prompts before the prompt that you were working on, or maybe after the prompt you were working on. You could add file cells. You could rerun cells. All of these different features are a little bit more capable than our threads feature, which is why we built it out, but it takes a little bit of a learning curve too from what we've seen. So hopefully at the end of today's session, you'll have enough to get started using notebooks. And then as always, we have some notebooks that we could share with you too if you want to get started. Some that are already built out. All you have to do is plug in your data, and you can make any adjustments as you need to them. I mentioned notebooks. So how do you even get to notebooks to begin with? You can click on New, and then you can click on Notebook here. You could also select any notebooks that have either been shared with you or you've created before in your My Notebook section. And then finally, you could even go to the, let's see here. You can go to the team notebooks, which is another way if you guys are a part of a team, any notebooks that your teammates have shared with you. And then alternatively, there is an Explore Notebooks page here too. And this is what I'll talk through a little bit later. All of these different notebooks have already been created. You could think of them like templates or workbooks or however you want to call it. I used to be a chef in my former life. I like to think of them like recipes, right? Recipes for analysis. These different recipes, you could just make a new run of a notebook, has all of the different steps already laid out for you. And again, all you have to do is add in the files to get started. In today's session, we're going to walk through making one of these from scratch. We'll do it for a use case for like a drop shipping company. Again, you could do it for any sort of data that you have at your disposal. We'll talk through the different types of cells that we see here. And then we'll also talk through like how do you reproduce or what are the other benefits of using a notebook to begin with. And then Bronson, you mentioned learn a little bit more collaboration features. That's something we'll touch on. In case you didn't know, you could share these notebooks with your team or with if you have like a different team at your company, or even if you're doing research at a school or university, you could share these. And just like a Google Doc or a Notion doc, everyone could hop into the same notebook, watch you type in real time, and even see the outputs of the prompts in real time too. Really cool way for you to just see and iterate on some analysis together, especially if you're looking for other people to have different experience from you, right? We've seen this in several ways, from like a marketing team sharing it with their analytics team, easier for them to collaborate together with. Then they can share it with their executive leadership team. It just makes it a lot easier for them to interact with over time, but we'll touch a little bit more on that later. Cool, so let's just go ahead and start off with a brand new notebook. This is one of the easiest ways that you can get started. Blank slate, and you have two different cells here. And again, cells are like the building blocks of a notebook. Or back to the recipe analogy, these are your ingredients, right? The first type of cell that we see here is a source cell. Source cells allow you to add any sort of data into Julius that you want to analyze, right? You could either select from data connections, which we'll talk about in the Thursday webinar, or we have another webinar on that previously. You could select any files that you've already uploaded into Julius before or that Julius has made for you. And you could even add from your Google Drive if you connected your Google Drive as well. So any of the different ways that you've added files like through threads, you could add them into your notebook through the source cell, right? I clicked on the drop down here in the upper right. These are all the different cells that you have available to you. And you'll also see that here at the insert cell button, you can see all the different cells that you could add. The other cool thing you'll see here is this shows up on the bottom, but you could also hover in between cells, and this is how you could add it before, in the middle, or after the cell that you're currently on. This other cell is the other most commonly used cell. This is your prompt cell. This is essentially where you're going to be typing to tell Julius what you want it to do. So if you just use these two cells by themselves, this is essentially the threads feature, right? This is the file you're adding in, and then this is you telling Julius what you want to do, right? That's how you can just easily get started there. What you see here on the top, we'll talk about this, is a notebook, right? You can click here to see all the different notebooks that you have. This is a template of a notebook, right? So every single notebook you could make adjustments to. You could use it as a template, for example. And later on, when you're done doing the analysis in your notebook or done creating your notebook for the first time, you could actually do what we call a run, which is a way for you to use that notebook that you created and run through all the different steps again without needing to create the notebook from scratch. So in this example, we created a CRM close loss reasons notebook. We just have to add in the data, and then we could run through the cells over again. And that's sort of the hierarchy of notebooks, right? You have all your notebooks. You have your specific notebook, like your template, that you could always edit and update. And then whenever you're done with the analysis, you could just run that, and you could have all these different runs without updating the template, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that later. That's the overall hierarchy and the terms there. Cool, we'll go back to my blank notebook that I had created. So let's go ahead and add in a data file, right? Let me just add in some of the drop shipping metrics that I had from before. Let's try some of these files here. I'm going to go ahead and click the done mark here. So right away, you'll see us adding the two data files to the notebook. And then already, just like the threads feature, there's some suggested next steps for how we want to analyze these. Let's just run with compare key metrics between files like that. This is the progress bar, right? So if you're used to threads, you're used to seeing like a spinning wheel on the bottom. Here it's in the upper left corner, and this is essentially how you run a cell or execute the prompt in Julius. No, nothing else different here. Again, Julius is going to write all of the Python for you, and it's going to execute it here in our sandbox environment. That's the other cool benefit of these cells is you could stop them at any time pretty easily, and then you could also run them or rerun them if you need to, right? So here we go. Julius is executing the cell. And it's running the prompt there. Let's say if you were to break it down, like file cells, like the source cell here makes up like 10% of your notebooks. The prompt cell makes up like 95% of the rest of the notebook. 10%, 95 is my math off. 85%. And then you have some miscellaneous cells that you might scatter in between, but these are the main building blocks that you have. Cool, so you see Julius had pulled in the data here into our notebook. The other thing that we have here is if you click on the right side, just like the threads feature, you could expand these data frames and you could see the files being uploaded, adjusted, or filtered in real time too. And that's a pretty useful feature if you're not used to having this. In my workflows and what I've seen from power users, they'll typically have one main screen open where they'll interact with Julius, and then they'll keep this open on the side just to interact with the different, or at least see the different data frames that are being populated here. Something we talked about in the 101 webinar. Cool, let's do one more piece of analysis. Let's just say, let's create a visualization using this data. Let's, what type of data is this? This is customer data. Let's plot some customer demographic data. And we'll run it. You could press run there by clicking it, or you could use, if you're on a Mac, Command Enter or Shift Enter if you're on a PC or Windows. And again, it's just going to execute the code. Make this a little bit bigger if this is easier to see, and close the sidebar. Cool, so we have some visualizations being created here, and some other visualizations here. This one looks kind of funny. I'll have to edit it later. Awesome, so this is one way that you can get started, right? Again, I mentioned that, hey, it's easy in notebooks. Let's say I could just add in a cell right here, and I'll say, let's filter customer demographics to only show customer demographics to only show, let's say, users that are aged 18 through 35. I'm going to expand this over, and then what you'll see either here, both in the prompt or the code that Julius is generating, but also in the data explorer, you'll see Julius right here filtering out the different age groups too. So here. You could expand this. I'm going to click this expand button so we can go to that data frame. Let's see here. And then you can see in this table here, it expanded and it filtered out those specific users here. And then now what I could do, since I added that cell before, is I could just click on the cell I ran previously and just rerun it, you know? And that's sort of the benefits of using these notebooks is you could easily, as you're doing your data analysis, whether it's exploratory data analysis or you have an idea of where you want to go, you could always add in cells or work backwards too without just working forwards. A lot more easy than doing this in the threads feature. Here we go. You can see that we filtered out only the users from 18 to 35. And then I'm going to expand some of this tiers too. You can click in to see some of these as well. The other cool thing that I typically do, right, if you click on the cogwheel, this is where you'll see all the settings. Say, for example, I don't want to use GPT-5. Maybe I like Claude Sonnet for making visualizations, which, to be honest, I actually do. Once I do that, all you have to do is press rerun again. And then this time we're going to use a different model to generate the same visualization. This is a lot more tricky to do in threads. A lot of times you have to either edit the prompt or rerun it. And then the cells, there really are no cells, right? So you can't rerun previous inputs as easily as you can in notebooks. So let's see what the visualization looks like here. See, look at that, slightly different, right? This is the cool thing about using both notebooks, but in Julius, we have all the different models. It's always fun to just see the different ways that the models visualize it, even though it's the same exact prompt. That's a double-edged sword, and we'll actually use that as a good segue, right? A good question that we get from a lot of users is, what do I do if I want more consistent results, right? Like I just used that same exact prompt in this notebook, right? And I got two completely different visualizations. In this case, it's because I used a different model, but even if you use the same model, for example, like if I were to rerun this cell, chances are the visualization is going to look completely different, right? If you're not familiar with LLMs like myself, like super in the technical know-how, these models are what they call non-deterministic. There's no one set way that it's going to essentially solve this prompt, right? That means it's going to write, and it will write, and probably did write, completely different code than it did that first or second time that I ran this cell. That can be a double-edged sword. Look at these visualizations. They're a lot different, right? The cool thing about notebooks, though, is you could simply click on this button right here, right? This is a little tiny button, little stamp icon, turned into repeatable steps. What this will do is actually going to take that cell and split it up into our prompt cell, what we have here, and the actual code, right? And you can just click accept two changes, and then that's what you'll see here. You have that prompt that I just ran, and then we have the code that Julius had just generated. Now, why is that a good thing, right? What does that actually do to solve the non-deterministic thing I was just talking about? Well, in this case, if I were to use this notebook in the future, or if I were to rerun the cell, Julius isn't generating any new code. It's actually just going to execute that same exact code that I had from before. So in theory, it should print the same exact visualization that I had just there, right? So that's one way that we could get around this non-deterministic thing, is we could just lock the code in place. You could sort of encase it in carbonite, just like Han Solo was, and you could just run the same exact code over and over again there. There are some caveats to that, which I'll talk a little bit more about, but that's the easiest way that you can really get more consistent results as you're using Julius, not just in just threads, but in notebooks in general too. So that's how you can do it. This is a good way for me to segue into our third cell, which is probably the third most common cell that we have here in notebooks, which is a code cell, and you'll see this here. There's actually three different types of code cells that you could add in. Python, most common one, right? You could simply just copy the code that Julius had written, which it writes in Python, at least in my case, and you could just paste it in there and you could run it yourself. You could paste in code that you have from Claude or OpenAI if you're working outside of Julius. If you have your own Python notebooks that you're working on, or your own Colab notebooks, you could even take the Python from there and just throw it into Julius, right? That's sort of what the Python code cell is for. And you can just run those just the same way, and you don't have to rely on Julius to generate any visualizations or new code for you. And we'll just reprint essentially the same thing that we just did there. Two other types of code cells that we have are, if you're a hardcore R enthusiast like we do have at Julius, you could use any R language here. And the other more common one is SQL, right? And we'll talk about this more on our Thursday webinar, but if you do connect to our data connectors with Snowflake, BigQuery, Postgres, you essentially need to write some SQL to query those, which Julius can do. Or if you know how to do it, or you want to edit the SQL, you could actually use the SQL code blocks here that we have as well. So those are the three foundational building blocks of notebooks, I would say. And with those, you could probably get, any sort of analysis done, right? The caveats I was talking about with the code cells previously is one thing to watch out for. If you're a non-technical user like myself, if the code does reference, let me scroll to here. If the code does reference a specific file, for example, like in this case, I grabbed customer lifetime value, for example, or customer demographics analysis. If you're running this again, you need to make sure that these sort of files, or what they call like variables, exist in your notebook, right? Oftentimes, if you add in a new sheet, maybe the title's slightly different, or you have another tab of data that the title is just slightly different, Julius isn't going to be able to pull the right file for you. It might pull an old file, it might pull the wrong file, and that's where you might see some weird results there, so something to watch out for. Best practice there is just keep the files like the same name if you can, if you're planning on using the same code over and over again. But that's just one thing to watch out for. Cool. Last type of cell I'll talk about really briefly is the markdown cell. Markdown cell, that's what it used to be called. It's actually called the text cell, but I call it the markdown cell. And this is what we saw on the notebooks I was showing earlier. This is a way for you to write down any notes, whether it's for yourself, your teammates, or maybe someone else that is using the notebook, right? Cool thing I've seen is people will make a notebook, like a data analytics team will make a notebook for the marketing team, and then share instructions or some guides there on how to use this notebook or some caveats there. And they'll share it in this markdown cell. So it's pretty self-explanatory. You could write down any markdown. You could say, this is my webinar notebook. You could say, let's analyze drop shipping data and show off the different cells you could use. And then you could simply click out of it, and then that's what it'll look like. Just a typical markdown cell. The other bonus points you get with this is you could add in images, videos, links, code. You could even add in LaTeX as well. We've seen several professors that are teaching Julius use this to put in any formulas that they want, or to even add in specific code blocks that they want their students to use. And that's it. Those are the main cells. I won't dive into the user input cell as much. I think that one is a little bit more tricky. That's probably the 0.05% of cells that are used. I'll just talk about it since I even brought it up. You can use this as a way to prompt the user, again, whether it's you that is using the notebook, someone else on your different team, or someone that you're sharing the notebook with, for their input on what they want Julius to do, right? So you could maybe ask them, who should we build this notebook for, and summarize the results for. This is a question for the user or whoever's reading this. And then you could instruct Julius, build a notebook and summarize the results for the user's intended audience, right? So I could say here, let's summarize this for my operations manager. You could run it. I remember why I didn't want to bring it up because I remember this is broken. I'll flag this to the team. But what Julius will do is essentially run this bottom prompt here, just like a prompt cell, and then it'll essentially build a notebook and then summarize the results as if it's for an operations manager. But the user input cell is just a way for you to gather input from a user, especially if it's not someone that built the notebook who might not have that context. Cool. Those are the main ways we're going to get started, right? So let's just say, let me just actually do it here. I'm going to put in the cell. Let's just run this here. And I'll say, build a notebook and summarize the results for an operation as if an operations manager was going to read this, and we'll run it. Okay, sometimes I see this. I'm just going to refresh it. Sometimes if you delete cells in sequence, it just will get stuck, or if the notebook gets out of sync with the server, it'll get stuck. Easy way to work around that, just refresh the notebook and then it'll go away. So I'm going to do this again here for the operations manager. I'm going to run it. Things that you experience doing things live, never a dull moment. But there we go. And then you'll see Julius printing out the report there. If you guys are familiar with making Jupyter notebooks, or you maybe have someone on your team that uses Jupyter notebooks, let me just show this. There's another way that you could actually create these notebooks too, without starting over from scratch, and that's something I'll talk over right after this is done printing. Yeah, that's one thing about Anthropic. When I use the cloud models, it is pretty thorough. So you'll see it generating even more points here. Something that's slightly different. That's the other cool thing that you'll see about the when you switch between models and you actually use them quite a bit. The way they structure these outputs is a little bit different. But we'll see how this one looks. That's why it's taking a little bit longer. It's just compiling a lot. Let's see. There we go. Yeah, sometimes it just looks funny. And this is like, I'll use Anthropic for some visualizations, but sometimes the way it prints the results and the way it structures like the markdown, what it was doing here, just kind of looks funny when it actually gets printed in Julius. That's why I typically won't use it. Visualizations look the same. It's the same sort of report. One caveat that we could also do, you can click this Generate Analysis Report button. One of our most commonly used features by business users and also by enterprise users, taking you guys a little bit behind the scenes here at Julius, does the same sort of thing. It's going to create a report without all of the code and the prompts that we use to create the notebook or the analysis. And it's going to give something that we could share. We could download it as a PDF, and you can share all those findings too. Pretty straightforward. Okay, before I got distracted, let me just go back to here. So there's another way. So if you guys are familiar with Python notebooks, or you do have someone on your team that knows how to use either Colab or some other notebooks, sort of IPYNB files, what I've learned recently, you could import that here. You could just click import, and then you could convert that Jupyter notebook into a Julius notebook in Jupyter, or in Julius. That's one way. And so you could select everything and add it as code. That's one way that you can get started. The other thing, and the reason why I'm calling it out, is if you're not familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, say, for example, you were working in a thread and you want to actually turn this thread into a notebook. Well, there's two easy ways that you could do it. You could click on the three dots and simply click on Convert to Notebook. That's one way. Or you could or you could download, and you could download these as Jupyter Notebooks too, and you could use that to upload or to save your work and add it as a Julius notebook. So two other ways that you could actually get started using Julius notebooks without starting over from scratch, if that makes sense. I saw a few questions pop into the chat, so I'm going to do this really quickly here. Is if you click on the chat settings, this is where you'll see all of the different settings, not just for threads, but also for notebooks. And then also, if you click on the edit details here, there's some specific ways that you could add in custom instructions, for example, that are really just specific for this one notebook, right? So in this example, if I really wanted it to only show users who are between 18 to 35 again, you can think of this like a backpack. Julius will carry this custom instruction throughout all the analysis within this notebook, so it's going to filter out results as needed. I've seen users use this to calculate things like ARR or MRR if they have a specific way that they calculate it. I've also seen users in Spanish putting, hey, I want the results to be in Spanish for this notebook only, and they could put those instructions here, and everything will be followed specifically in this one notebook. Separately, things like customization, you could also add those in here as well. Things like chart themes, something we covered in the last webinar. You could either use some of the pre-built themes, and these will apply to your notebook, or you could even create a brand new theme, and those will apply to your notebook as well. All right, let's imagine I did this analysis, right? Maybe I love the way this is done. Maybe I need to run this report, every single week or something, right? Let me go back here. I'm just going to title this. We'll just call this my weekly drop shipping report. And I'll put like very important. One of the cool features that our team built out is the ability to actually schedule these notebooks to be run on occasion, right? You could simply click on this this clock icon here. You can click on enable schedule, and you could put how frequently you want this notebook to be run. Daily, weekly, monthly, which time zone you're in. So say, for example, I'm going to do this. Right now it is 1:30 p.m. here in San Francisco. So I'm going to schedule this for I don't know if it's going to make it in time. I'll do 1:45 p.m. I'll do daily, and I can click Save Schedule. And then now if I go back to my notebooks page, you can simply click on your scheduled here, and you'll see that, hey, this is set to run, and this is one of my scheduled notebooks. One way that you could actually test this out is if you go to the clock feature again, and you could just click Test Schedule. You'll see this scheduled test submitted successfully. I'm going to go back to my scheduled notebooks here, and you'll see it created what we call like an instant run. And this is a way that, let me open it here. Julius is going to essentially run that notebook on its own without you needing to be in there. Few things to call out. This is a very brand new feature. So if you guys do use it, again, I'll plug the community Slack afterwards, but please let us know any feedback for our team who's working on this feature. It's a brand new thing that just came out right off the presses from last week. A few things to call out. These cells will rerun if they run into errors, right? So in case you're relying on Julius to generate code, not uncommon for Julius to run into some errors and then have to debug it itself. If it ever does get stuck, it's going to retry each cell 3 times. And it's going to try its best to get to the very, end of this notebook without you needing any input. So it's going to run those cells as needed and rerun them as needed too. Other caveat, it's best for notebooks that are pretty well polished, ones that you're able to run through on your own while you are watching it run. If there are any errors with the cell or the prompts are just vague enough where it is going to get Julius stuck in a loop, probably not the best thing to schedule. But if it's something that you've worked through in the past, you've run this notebook multiple times, we internally use the scheduling for our sync that we have every Wednesday. So going back to the code feature that I was talking about earlier is it doesn't have any actual prompt cells in there. It's all just code that Julius has ran before in the past. So I know, or else I'm fairly certain it's going to be able to run. That's one other thing to call out. And the last thing, it needs like a pretty stable data source, right? What really makes these scheduled runs useful is if the data ever updates, right? So if you ever do have more up-to-date data, or if you have refreshed data, say for example, I'm using my CRM data, right? If I had new customers since the last time I ran it, I'll want that in the notebook, right? That's something we'll talk a little bit more about on Thursday when it comes to data connectors. Easy way for you to get access to live data connected directly into Julius, and then letting that, run on its own versus needing something like a Google Drive or a Google Sheet. Looks like we ran into an error here on the bottom. And this is, again, what I mentioned before, probably best for notebooks that are pretty well ironed out or ones that you've ran through before. It's actually that same exact issue I was talking about. There's probably a missing file name in here, and that's probably why it's just like, hey, I have no idea what you're talking about. I can't find that specific file. I don't know what to do. It tried 3 times. It ran into errors, right? So that's something that I would, again, recommend just double checking. Use a notebook that you've used before multiple times or have been able to run through multiple times for scheduling. But again, it's a brand new feature. Just let us know if you have any feedback. And again, join our community Slack. You can also see a link here in Julius on the left sidebar. Team's always open to feedback too. Coming down the pipeline, you can imagine some useful things that will come from this. Some common feature requests from the users who have tried the scheduled notebooks feature out is one, where do the results go, right? First, it's cool that it lives inside the notebook, but I think some folks have asked it for it to send maybe like a Slack update to a channel, or maybe send email notification to a select audience, or maybe even update something like a dashboard, right? These are all things that logically make sense and they're on the team's radar. If you guys are using it or do test it out and there are things that come to mind, after you've experts of the notebooks after today's sessions, try it out and let us know. If you're like, hey, I wish it had this, or I wish it made this, then let us know. Always open to feedback or some any product requests too. Hey, look, it's working through it. So yeah, again, maybe in Thursday's session, we'll walk through this a little bit more. It'll make a little bit more sense when you actually use a data connector, which we'll talk about, or you could refer to our previous webinars. But if you do have live data connected to your notebook, really easy for you to just schedule it and have those results periodically scheduled. I'm going to click back into this template again. I'm going to click one more time. You could even create manual runs again. Say I wanted to do a manual run of it. You just click the play button, and now you could run through it again on your own, right? I have a couple of notebooks that I've shared in our community. I'll share it as well. One of my most commonly used ones is like a synthetic notebook, right? I have one for generating data for these use case webinars, right? I can't really show any drop shipping metrics because I actually don't have a drop shipping business, but I have a notebook that I use that I'll share where you could even generate these workflows or these notebooks over time too. So without doing it from scratch. And then finally, I'll open up a few more of these in the Explore Notebooks page. There's a whole bunch of different ones that we have here, from customer segmentation analysis, acquisition channel efficiency analysis, even things like data cleaning and data processing. Really easy way for you to filter or clean data before you even analyze it. You could use these like building blocks by running them and then just updating them as needed. So that's another way that you guys can get started. Cool. I'm going to take a look at the chat here and see if there's any other questions before I hop out for Q&As there. Have you noticed any difference in outputs, good or bad, with GPT-5? I would say, yeah, earlier in the webinar, I talked about visualizations anecdotally being better with Anthropic's models. And you can sort of see that from, let me go back to my notebook that I was just working on, which was this one. You can see the difference between some of these ones, which I used GPT-5 originally, and then Claude's, the Anthropic ones. I think previously I was leaning pretty heavily on Claude's because I just like aesthetically like the visualizations a lot better. But I've noticed, and the team's noticed, that the visualizations from GPT-5 are a lot better than they were with either O3 or 4.0, which we were using previously. Again, you can still select those as well from here. I had to double check. You can still select O3 and O4 and 4.1 too. We have a video in our YouTube where you can actually see the difference is even for the same exact prompt, same exact code, how they visualize them slightly differently. But at least so far, I think the GPT-5 has gotten a lot better, at least initially from its release earlier last week. The speeds have gotten a little bit better, but the results that we've seen are more robust and more thorough than what we've seen with even O3 and even some of the Sonnet models too. Okay, I think, let's see, Scooterby, if any step failed, will report restart? Yep, exactly, so it will. If it just doesn't get stuck in a loop, it'll just try to rerun the cell until it's able to get through it. So far, we haven't ran into any issues with any notebooks that are pretty well polished, but if it's one that's like, really rough around the edges, if it's a first draft notebook, it might just get stuck. But the team's always monitoring there in case that does happen. Mohsen, I tried, but I failed. Is anything specific that you failed with? Let us know. Happy to walk through. Is there a version for academia? There is, right? So if you guys are faculty or you are students currently, we do offer a pretty generous 50% discount from all of our plans for life, right? So all you have to do, reach out to team@julius.ai with proof of your enrollment, and then we'll get back to you there. And then also, if you're looking for something larger, if you have a class of 30, 50, if you have a class of 1,000, similar to what we did with Harvard Business School, contact us. We're always looking, and we could do something even better for you guys too. Thursday meeting, how and where to enroll from? It's going to be a great question. You could do so here if you just click on, we'll follow up an email, but you could always follow our Luma. I just typed in Luma. You can just go to, let me see if I can pull it up here. Luma here. I wonder if this will work. Just sign in. Maybe I could just share our company page here. So we'll share this in the chat as well. And then you can subscribe to this one to at least RSVP to the upcoming webinars. Subscribe to us to get notified, but you can also just follow us on YouTube Live. We're always here every Tuesday, Thursday, which will be the schedule. And this one will be a little bit earlier. It'll be at 11 a.m. But again, if you guys can't make it, no worries. We record every single one of these. You can just go to our YouTube here and then click on live, and then you can actually view the previous webinars here too, including the one that we're on right now. Awesome. I'm going to pop out of here real quick. I'm going to look at the chat more in depth. Let me update this here. Okay. I wish this application had integration to plot 5 to 10 graphs in just one plot. We'll take that as feedback. Yeah, you should be able to if you just tell Julius to do it and to print them all, or maybe if you might need to do it in 2 prompts, but that's something that I'll share with the team. This notebook looks great for individual or personal dashboards or for small SMBs. What about bigger corporations, or if there's data lakeouts going on, how to integrate? Tune in for our Thursday one. I'll just give you a sneak peek right now. Is if you go into our data connectors page, you could view all of the different ways that we allow you to connect data directly into Julius, right? 1 month ago, this was only 3 different connectors, so we're always iterating even more. You have some ones that you could add on, like BigQuery, Postgres, Snowflake, the big 3. You could just query directly to them. You might, if you're not technical, you might need some help with your IT department to add those in. Likely you'll need some help from your security department to make sure you have clearance to do that or that you authorize it. Always reach out to us if you have any security questions. It's a good segue into going to security.julius.ai. This brings you to our Trust Center, where you could request either our security 1 pages or even our SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, our last report that we have from our audit. You can request there as well. But essentially how this works is you could connect directly to your Snowflake, Postgres, and BigQuery. I wonder if I have it connected here. Let's see. We'll just do a sneak peek while we're here. Let this connect. This is to our Postgres demo database that you'll see here, right? I'll expand this to show you some of the different files that we have available, or the different tables that we have available, sorry. Fairly large. I know it's not as realistic as some of your guys' data sets. I've heard from some companies that they have thousands of columns, right? Or thousands of tables with thousands of columns. This is just one to show off sort of how it works generally, but it can handle, thousands of columns, millions of multiple millions of rows. I'll just say analyze, oh wow, that's an omega sign. Analyze sales by store using my Postgres connector. I'm actually going to switch it from Cloud4 so it doesn't do that. We'll just use GPT-5 to show off a little bit. Okay, and then what you're going to see here is right there. We just wrote some SQL, right, to query from our Postgres connector, right? We'll talk about this more in depth on Thursday. I could talk for hours, and I have talked for hours about this, but the cool thing is we learn about this data, right? So even if you don't have the schema information or you don't know what each table is, Julius will learn this over time. It's really, really cool. It really does feel like magic. I myself am non-technical. I myself really don't understand some of the tables, even our own internal database. Julius is able to query those and start building that context over time, similar to the way maybe a data analyst would, or someone who has that familiarity with your infrastructure. It'll write the query for you, so it doesn't run into those errors. The reason why I'm showing this off is because you could imagine, like, this just pulled the sales that I have right now from this table. If that table's being updated with real-time data as new sales are coming in, you could imagine, to answer your question, these dashboards or these notebooks can be fueled with this data without you needing to upload a sheet or download or write a query to grab a sheet to upload back into Julius, right? You could unlock the ability to schedule the notebooks to be reran. You could have these updates be eventually just emailed to you without you needing to do anything, right? Those are all some of the things that we have in mind, or at least the vision for where we imagine this is going to go. And this is where we're seeing some of these enterprise customers starting to use or really lean into Julius now that we've essentially unlocked their connections to these data warehouses too. Hopefully that's enough of an answer there without diving too much in depth. Otherwise, I could easily turn this into another 2.5-hour webinar. Love to do it, but I want to be conscious of everyone's time. Any chance you'll support test and demo environments where we could test connectors? You should be able to, right? As long as, like, if it does test environments, if you do have some way to connect to it, whether it's like via API or if there is like a IP address or host, you could connect to it. We do support like Supabase. We also support MCPs too. It's a term that I learned recently, but we do have an MCP store that you can connect to. We're adding more. If you have your own MCP server, it's different ways that you could sort of connect to it. And we've heard from some folks that have built their own apps that are working in dev environments, or they don't really want to put it on production data, or they don't want to take down their website because all of their production database lives on Postgres too. Different ways that you can connect as well. Do you anticipate performance issues as these Postgres DBs get bigger? Yes, we do. It's one of the caveats with having everything on Postgres, right? If your table has like millions of rows, it's going to query, and we have some internally that do have multiple millions of rows. It does take a little bit of time. Julius can handle it, right? If you go to the threads and you look at your resource monitor, you could see I was only using 3.3 gigabytes so far. You could expand this if you need to. You could expand up to 32 gigabytes of RAM. One way that you could help boost it a little bit more. Really haven't ran into issues. It just takes the queries to run longer, just as if you were querying it yourself using things like DataGrip or pgadmin, for example. When it comes to things like BigQuery and Snowflake, on the other hand, you're actually using their processing power, right? In that sense, it's up to those environments that you've set up and any usage or limit rates that you have on that side from what we've seen. Oh, does Julius have a test environment? Oh, sorry, I didn't understand. Okay, yeah, that's something that we could follow up with. There are, first, we do have some demo DBs that we can share. I'll follow up to see if I'm able to share those. We've done that on one-off basis. The one thing that I'll call out is test, if you just go to, whatchamacallit, if you go to Snowflake, you can make a free account, right? And they have a whole bunch of demo tables in there, right? In fact, this data set that I was showing off in this thread, sorry, where am I going? This data set that I was showing off in this thread was using one of Snowflake's actual TCP databases that they have there. It's a way for them to just test the performance of their infrastructure, right? You can simply just log in there. BigQuery also, if you just make a free BigQuery account, you can connect that directly into Julius, and they have a whole bunch of public data sets there. I'll follow up to see if we have any publicly. That is a common request, is if there's a way for us to simply just use a demo database just to test it out. That's something I'll follow up with after the call. And then finally, does Julius have data governance capabilities? I'm not the best person to answer that one. I'm actually not sure what that means. Reference our security center here and see if there's any answers. You could also message security@julius.ai. We're really responsive there if you have any questions. Also, more than happy to just hop on a call too, if it is something that will help unblock something like you getting approval to use Julius at an enterprise or your university too. Okay, I'll take 2 more questions here. We see K Nirvana Singh says, when tables are created in Julius for Word documents, it does not translate correctly. The tables end up broken and segmented. Office is all up to date. That's something that I think we do that is on our radar. Julius doesn't do the best when it comes to just outputting to docx, for example. And we do use a workaround where we do use custom instructions, right, to translate things, but it's not going to be the best. I've seen some of the formatting be off for things like docx and also even for PDFs too. It's just not quite there. The cool thing that you could try to do is just output the files yourselves manually, or tell Julius, make this into something that you could copy and paste, and then you could translate it into something that's better at translating. But even in English, ones that I've seen, Julius really isn't the best. It's more suited just for data analysis. We're still working on building out, this reports feature. We built this out maybe 3 weeks ago. It's our first stab at making something that's easily shareable, something that you can share. One of the common features once we released this was, hey, is there a way for you to do docx as well, or even download as a slide? Something that we'll follow up with the team on. But if you guys do run into issues, or if you do hey, I wish it really did this, or this would really unblock me or my organization, again, just join our community Slack here. We just started this up. We used to have a community forum that we followed up on, but I think Slack is just a little bit easier to get started chatting or just interacting with folks. Go ahead and click here and just get started. More than happy to take any feedback or any product requests there. Awesome. Cool. Well, hopefully the session wasn't too much information for you. One thing that I didn't mention, I just realized, is our documentation. You can visit this to also read up about, first, anything just to get started using Julius. We're frequently updating our docs. When it comes to notebooks, we have our notebook specific session where we have any videos that we've recorded previously, but also all the different building blocks for all those different cells that we were talking about and how to use them. A little bit more in depth than what I talked about here today. Finally, it's some FAQs too. And then as always, you can always reach out in the community as well. Awesome. I wanted to say thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll follow up after the call with any links or any of the things that I talked about in today's webinar. We'll also follow up with some demo notebooks too that you could connect with. I'll share your guys' feedback with the team about demo databases. I think that's a great idea, something that we always get questions about. And we'll see you in the Thursday webinar. This one, again, we'll dive even more in depth in the data connectors themselves. We'll actually go through setting them up in real time. Knock on wood, I don't run into any issues. I was able to do it last time from start to finish without running into issues, but we'll try it out. URL for community Slack here. I'm going to just copy and paste this guy here. Backlink here. We'll see if this one works. I'm not sure how it does with sharing links in YouTube, but we'll follow up in an email as well to all the folks who have attended. Also for those who haven't been able to join live. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys in the next webinar. Hope you ran into issues with Microsoft. Okay, thank you. We'll follow up there. I think just issues with exporting into docx specifically. Thank you so much for joining. We'll see you guys in the next webinar. I hope you guys have a great rest of your morning, evening, or night, wherever you guys are tuning in from. And we'll see you in the next one. Take care.